Well, good afternoon and welcome everyone, and thank you for being with us today for a really important day. Of course, it was 75 years ago today, June 6, 1944, more than 73,000 American forces joined with some 85,000 Allied forces in landing on 5 beaches along a 50-mile stretch on the heavily fortified coast of France's Normandy region. It was the largest amphibious military assault in history, and what many historians believe was the most impactful day of the 20th century. The operation involved some 10,000 aircraft, 24,000 paratroopers, and an armada of some 7,000 vessels. Behind those numbers, of course, are stories of individuals, stories of those who summon the greatest qualities of which human beings are capable: courage beyond measure, loyalty beyond words, sacrifice and ingenuity and endurance beyond imagining. I've always been fond of the story that told about the great General George Marshall, who at the beginning of World War II was asked if America had a secret weapon that would ensure victory in the war. And he thought about it for a minute, and he said, "We do have a secret weapon. It's the best darn kids in the world." Only being a general, I don't think he used the word darn. But we have 2 of those best darn kids with us today. We're honored to have with us today. We'll be meeting a little bit later. And of course, those words have been true not just in World War II, but ever since. In Korea, in Vietnam, in Afghanistan, in Iraq, America is free because we have the best darn kids in the world, and we honor those kids today. Are there any veterans, besides our 2 special guests, if there are other veterans in the audience, please stand, or raise your hand if you can't stand. And let's thank them for their service. So. We're honored to do this program today in conjunction with Mighty Endeavor and Veterans Legacies, a wonderful, wonderful organization, and you'll hear more about that from their founder and their president, Gary Mortensen. So please join me in welcoming my friend, Gary Mortensen.
Well, good afternoon. What a wonderful turnout. First, I want to say thank you to Carrie Timchuk and the Oregon Historical Society, the best darn historical society in the world. So, Carrie, whenever I ask for something, Carrie is always the first to respond, so thank you very much for this. Do we have one more World War II veteran in the back, perhaps? Sir, are you a World War II veteran? So we're honored to have 3 World War II veterans today. And, yes. It's a bittersweet anniversary, as we all know. Every single day we lose more of these wonderful veterans, and not just from World War II, but from the Korean War and the Vietnam War and so on. We founded Veterans Legacies so that we could engage all of you to help us preserve these stories. We like to say it takes an army to save history. And so hopefully you're here because you believe that as well. And if you have a story or a family member's story to tell, we certainly would encourage you to engage us after this presentation, and we'll show you how to do that. There are a few folks I do want to recognize. Nick Kimball in the back, way back there, is the co-founder of the organization. And Nick has done the heavy lift of building a very complex database that handles millions and millions of records. And our goal is to have millions and millions of stories preserved so that the deeds of all of our veterans are never forgotten. I also want to acknowledge a few folks on our board. Adrian Rourke back there, General Manager and President of Fox 12. Thank you, Adrian. Lou Miller and Barry Greenberg are also on our board today. And I also want to thank Pat Reeser. I know you're here as well, and Pat, thank you for your support of our organization. It's the support of folks like yourself that are allowing us to get into the schools and really help ensure that these histories and legacies are never forgotten. So without further ado then, I'd like to introduce our Executive Director, Terry Howell. Terry came to us. He was the head of strategic partnerships for military.com for many years, and we're really, really lucky to have someone like Terry to lead our organization.
Thanks, Gary. So it's going to take us a few minutes to get set up here. So while we do that, I'd like to go ahead and run a short clip. It's a newsreel from the D-Day invasion itself. Gentlemen, would you like to join me up here?
Vast convoy of seaborne assault forces stood deployed against 50 miles of French coastline. American forces were commanded by Lieutenant General Bradley. British and Canadian forces were under command of Lieutenant General Dempsey. Shattering the dawn 90 minutes before H hour, the naval bombardment opened up. It was like a convulsion of nature. More shell tonnage was expended in 1 hour than in the entire Allied naval campaigns of World War I. Each warship had its assigned targets, its individual schedule of fire. Prime targets were the enemy's powerful coastal guns. Infantry units that would comprise the second assault wave began transferring into their assault boats. The first assault wave was already standing by, waiting for the signal to dash inshore. The last phase of air bombardment began at 05:30, 1 hour before touchdown of the ground troops. Streams of heavy, medium, light, and fighter bombers crossed the channel in the most intensive airstrike of the entire assault operation. Objective, to isolate the battle area until we could consolidate our beachheads and begin the breakthrough. The big guns poured it on. Combat teams, each on a schedule, continued their unloading into assault boats. There would be little time between the first assault wave and the second. Now the rocket ships opened up, smashing at underwater obstacles and coastal mines, over the heads of the first wave of assault troops, firing their massed salvos with close precision until the troops were 300 yards from the beaches. The fury from the air went on and on. Our airmen in tactical support of the ground forces took no rest that day. Back from one sortie, they gassed up, loaded their bombs and ammunition belts, and grimly went out again. Hung up and fire from enemy batteries, extremely accurate. In the confusion, boats went astray or got out of control and crashed into one another. Forced to jump out of sinking boats, many men had to discard their weapons and equipment to save themselves from drowning. Casualties in the first hour were heavy. The British fired at fortified houses as they came in, smashing many a sniper's nest and observation post. In one American sector, fire from enemy pillboxes kept many of our men pinned against the shore cliffs. Our casualties were high. In the British sector, special duty engineers hit the beach first, with the medics and infantry following. With the beachhead secure, the infantrymen lost no time in driving on to other objectives. The second assault wave came in. In one American sector, enemy resistance was only sporadic and was quickly silenced. Our forces made substantial penetrations in the first hours. So it went on the beaches of Normandy this fateful day in June. Reinforcements continued to pour ashore. Artillery and heavy engineering equipment were firmly established. The German boast that an invading force could not remain ashore for 9 hours had been flung back on the now desperate defenders. Hitler's fortress had been cracked. The great gamble had been won, having accomplished what many European military leaders believed never could be done, a cross-channel invasion. The Allies were now in position to apply their great power to the methodical destruction of the German armed might, to bring retribution to the fiendish criminals that had conceived it, to scourge it and them from the face of the earth.
Wow. My first question is like, which one were you? So we're going to bring one more veteran, the other gentleman up here. While they do, I just wanted to kind of start the introductions. This is Abe Lorenzo and Ben Asquith. They're both local gentlemen who obviously were at one point or another part of that invasion. And I'd like to start off by asking Abe, could you tell us when you joined and what city you joined from and so on?
I joined in July of 1943 from Albany, New York. I'm not a resident of this area. 80 years in New York before we moved out here.
Well, we're glad to have you out here. And Ben, could you tell us about when you joined and where from?
Yeah, I joined in February of 43 and from Dayton, Oregon, and that's where location I'm still at. So I haven't moved around very much, but I appreciate being here, and I appreciate being called a kid again.
So I'm going to kind of move over here from a, sir, would you please tell us your name and when you joined?
My name is Jerry Newleman, and I went in 1942. I belong to an Oregon National Guard. Excuse me. We fought in France, Germany, Belgium, Holland, for a period of a long time. But we weren't in on D-Day. They brought us in on D+30 because they weren't moving. And we took the port of Cherbourg so they could bring in big ships in. Of course, the harbor they built was swamped, and so they had no way of helping the guys that were there. We lost a lot of people there. We really didn't do a good job preparing for it. The Germans were better than we were, but we finally warmed down. Oh, thank you very much. And it's a time and period. I had 32 guys in my section. I lost 12 of them. 12 of them got killed. Another 15 got wounded. So it was a bad time. We were just kids. It was a bad time for us. But I think it's very nice of you to have this because these gentlemen did a lot in World War II. Everybody there was just young people. They had a draft age up to 35, but the average age was probably 21. And it was a terrible time. And I'm glad you people didn't have it, and I'm glad we see kids. So I hope it never happens again.
Can you tell me which service were you in, sir?
I beg your pardon?
Which branch of the service were you?
I was in the artillery, field artillery, attached to 104th Infantry. People would say to me, if you're in artillery, you shouldn't be able to hear things. I spend 99% of my time with the infantry. So I don't have to worry about the artillery, but I had a great colonel in artillery. He always believed we should be up with the infantry.
Great. Well, I'm going to switch back over to Abe. Abe, so after you entered, where did you go for training?
Thank you very much.
I took my boot training at Sampson Naval Training Station. It's on Seneca Lake, New York.
And from there you went to?
From there, I went to Miami of Ohio University to take my radio training. I was there for about 6 months learning how to be a radio man.
So you were a radio man, and Ben, you were a machinist, correct?
Yeah, I started dealing at Farragut, Idaho. Did my boot training in Farragut. And I moved east to more training in Ames, Iowa for engineering at Ames, Iowa. And then I went over to Norfolk, Virginia. And then from up there, I went up and down the coast, I don't know how many times, but several different ports on the East Coast.
So where did you begin the training that actually, as far as your assault, the landing training?
Oh, I think Farragut or Fort Pierce, Florida, was what I done my most training in there, and it was quite rigid training all the time, and so that prepared us for overseas training for the
I know you've had to
invasion.
tell this part of the story a lot, but you want to tell us about the sandbags?
Oh, well, I do have a story about the sandbags. Down there in Florida, we went on a 72-hour maneuver. That's 72 hours on duty, no sleep, no rest. Actually on duty for 72 hours. And by the time we got that done, there was some unhappy kids. And we was all just telling all the Navy what we thought about them. And then that got over, and then we went overseas and did more training there. And during the invasion, we had a pretty rough time, but it was our duty to get there. And we worked pretty hard. And so the actual invasion and it was just a little under 72 hours that we was on duty. And it popped into my mind about this training that we went through. And so I guess the officers knew what they was doing.
So D-Day or H-hour itself was about 06:30 for the invasion itself, the embarkment. What were you doing prior to that on your LCM? By the way, he was on an LCM, which is a landing craft, mechanized. So you'll see the image come up occasionally of it. And so your job was a machinist on that, and you guys were taking in supplies and so on before the invasion, is that correct?
Yeah. Well, we started out at Plymouth, England, and they loaded us up with 40-foot 3-inch hoses packed with TNT. And so we had a full load of that. And we went over with the convoy on the 5th during the night. And we got to the beach about 4 or 5 in the morning. And then we went into the beach. I don't know just what time it was before. I think about 30 minutes before the invasion. And we had this TNT, and the Army engineers came in and unloaded it from us. And then we went back out and circled around a while, and they started calling us in for the troops. So we started unloading the troops, and we unloaded troops and Jeep and several other things during the day. And then it was just kind of a detail of whatever they had to unload for us. And I can't remember how the day went. But it was our duty to take it in, and we didn't really think about anything. The most thing I can remember about the invasion was the firepower and the noise, the machine gun chatter on the water vibrated, and with the machine guns and the firepower, overhead firepower, and everything. I think the most vivid thing in my mind about the invasion was the noise beside the men going in and getting lost. And it was war.
So Abe, your experience was a little bit different. You were on a slightly larger vessel, an LCI-L, which the one picture we have up there is the type that had the open bow, which is the local landing craft, the LCI 713, which, by the way, is being restored, and it's a floating museum. It's an awesome piece of work they've done. Back to the story. And yours was slightly modified, or slightly different. It had the gangplanks on the sides, right? And you, unlike Ben, you were in the radio room,
Correct.
Transmitting and receiving signals and where to go and so on. Do you want to share with us what your experience was?
My experience, excuse me. My experience was actually through the eyes of our signalman and the bow gunner. I was in the radio room. I could hear the noise going on. Of course, there were shells dropping all around us from the German 88 millimeter guns. But I didn't see with my eyes what was going on. But I'm told that as we approached the shore, and it was difficult to get there, by the way, it's a good thing that the LCM guys cleared the beach somewhat for us, because our skipper had to find a way through the rubble in the water in order to land the troops. So he was looking for a way in, I understand, and there was someone on the beach waving a Q flag, which signaled to him, here's a way in. So we were among the first of 12 LCIs to hit that beach. And we were on at 11:03 in the morning, and we were off loading. We were getting off the beach at 11:11. So it was an 8 minute, I'll get it after a while, an 8-minute job, and we had to unload 200 troops. And I understand while this was going on, our executive officer was yelling, get those men moving, keep them moving, keep them moving. And the skipper, from what I understand from Mr. Leakin, who was the signalman, was an awfully nervous guy and showed it, but I don't imagine there were too many that weren't nervous at that particular time. Because when you have machine gunners shooting at you and you have 88 millimeter cannons shooting at you, there's something to be nervous about. Of course, I was in a position where I was away from the action, so to speak. You couldn't see me because I was in the radio room and I was doing my duty in the radio room. So we were on and off the beach in 8 minutes. But on the way, we picked up a wounded infantryman. And we took him to an LST, which was acting as either a hospital ship, or at least they had medical personnel aboard. And when we came alongside of that LST, there was an arm reaching out, a steel arm from that LST that had small boats on it. And our skipper apparently did not see it. So we came alongside of that, and one of those arms came right through the bulkhead of where I was seated in the radio room. Well, when I was jarred out of my chair, I thought we were hit by a German 88 millimeter, but it was not. It was the captain who made a mistake, and we limped back to England for repairs. We went back to England for repairs, and about 3 or 4 days we were back to Normandy with Signal Corps troops. And when we were landing, after we had landed the Signal Corps troops, we could not get off the beach because they didn't get off fast enough, and the tide was faster than they were. So we were sitting ducks on the beach, waiting for something to happen, and it did. Messerschmitt 109s came over and tried to strafe us. So we were dodging bullets while we were sitting on the beach. But we knocked out those ME-109s with the help of everybody else in that, on the shore that had a gun. So we blew them out of the air, and that was my story as far as action is concerned.
So following that, you went to dry dock, and you guys continued to bring reinforcements for how many days were you doing the operation in Normandy?
We worked back and forth from England, picking up reinforcements from England and dropping them off back onto Normandy.
And then after that, your ship later deployed to France? Is that correct?
Later on, our ship deployed for the invasion of southern France. We went down to the Mediterranean, and jokingly, we had a man aboard the ship who thought that we were going downhill, so we were going to get down to the Mediterranean faster than we got from Norfolk to England. So we played that joke with him. So he thought we were going to go downhill, we'd be going faster. Anyway, we made the invasion of Normandy, and the invasion of Normandy was quite a thing, but the invasion of southern France, to us, seemed like a dry run in comparison.
So just to be clear, I probably didn't cover this earlier. Both of them were in the Omaha Beach invasion portion. So out of all the invasions, that one was the bloodiest. Over 2,000 men were lost because of a lot of different factors. But there was a total of, 5, 6 beaches that were attacked. 2 of them the U.S. invaded, which was Utah and Omaha.
I might add to that our bow gunner saw a Navy destroyer knock out that pillbox that was giving the Army and all of us the trouble.
Those are the kind of stories we're here for, right? And another thing we need to clarify, so we talked about the LSM, which is the mechanized landing, or LCM, I mean, and the LCI, which is landing craft infantry. And then when he spoke of the LST, that's kind of a large version of the LCI, which is landing ship for tanks. So, all right.
I want you people to be proud of the Oregon National Guard. They were involved in every battle in Europe, 6 or 7 major battles, and we had 40% casualties, but that was your Oregon kids. They did a great job.
Yes, indeed. So, Ben, after your time in Normandy, where was your next mission?
We worked off of Normandy for about 6 weeks, and then they loaded us up on a tank retriever and took us up to the Rhine River, and then we helped to cross the Rhine River at Mainz, Germany. And we stayed up there. We worked up there on the, just across, and we took a lot of trucks across more the 6x6s. And it was a quick way with no bridges. So we just went back and forth across the river, taking these trucks across.
Sir, when you first deployed to Europe, where was your first point of entry?
Well, it was Normandy. We went right from the United States to Normandy because we took Cherbourg, Of course, they were having such a trouble on the two beaches that we were new, so they sent us there. But I got to tell you about your Oregon National Guard. They were just great kids. We're all 18, 19, 20 years old. I was wounded 3 times. I was a prisoner of war. But that was typical of your Oregon National Guard. And you all should be very proud of them.
Yes, indeed. So I'd like to open it up if anybody has questions from the audience that they'd like to ask any of the gentlemen here.
What were the names of the captain and the new XO?
What were the names of the captain and the new XO?
Well, the captain of our ship was John L. Gurney. But after the collision that we had with the LST, when we returned back to Normandy, the new skipper was James P. Gilligan. So we had Gilligan's as a captain when we went back to Normandy. I might add that when I first got on I never had any training or beaching exercises before I got on that ship. I was about a week in Norfolk, Virginia, and they put the radio man on the 409 in the brig for some reason, and I was put on the 409, and 24 hours later, I was on my way to England. That is all the training I ever had on LCIs.
We have another question.
First of all, thank you for your service very much. Have any of you been back to Normandy? Have you been back to Normandy since the war? It's a question for any of you.
What was the question?
Have you been back to Normandy?
I have not been back. I had the opportunity to go back, but since I'm legally blind, I felt it would be very difficult for me to appreciate going there.
So I have one more question for you, and then we'll kind of switch to the social time with cake. I just wanted to ask you, all three of you, when you got into the thick of it, you don't have to go into much detail, but could you share with us at some level, your feelings and what got you through some of the hard points of that day?
I think that I got through it. Well, I got through it because God preserved us. But as far as I'm concerned, I think I was too dumb to appreciate the danger. And I didn't tremble or shiver about it. Just went through it, and here I am.
One thing I had been told a number of times is the LCIs have a 1/4 inch of steel. So there wasn't much between him and the bullets and the 88 millimeters and so on coming at him. So you may have felt safe, but Ben, you want to tell us?
I think this fellow here said it about as good as anything. We did go through a lot of training, and there's a story I told you about the beach, and so we did a lot of training. So when we got over there, we hit the beach, and actually in my mind, it was just about like another training exercise. We was trained to do the job, and we went over there with our mindset on taking these men into the beach. And so that's what we done. And one fellow asked me at one time here, a short time ago, well, what was your really feelings? And I said, I had no feelings at that moment. If I'd thought about it, I might have turned around and run. But we didn't think about it. Our duty was to hit the beach. And that's what we did. So, and this fellow, like he says, it was just one of the things we were trained for.
Sir, can you tell us how you got through?
I had 36 people to take care of. They ran from age 18 to 45. I felt a great responsibility. I was 19 years old, but I felt a great responsibility because this was all new to us, and it was a terrible tragedy, that war.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate your time. And with that, we'll pass it back over to Mr. Timchuk. Thank you, sir.
One more round of applause for our three heroes here. So.
You're really applauding.
One of the honors of my life has to be associated with Senator Bob Dole, who's kind of America's preeminent World War II veteran. Senator Dole will be 96 in July. I spent a number of years as his speechwriter and legal counsel, and still am in close contact with him. And my favorite story that he tells about what he calls the best definition of leadership he's ever seen. And it was from a letter that Dwight Eisenhower wrote, Supreme Commander. And the night before the invasion, Eisenhower retired to his tent, and he wrote 2 letters. One to be released to the public and the world if D-Day was a success, and one to be released if it was a failure. Of course, the one that everybody saw when it was released was a success. Never once in that letter did Eisenhower use the word I. Things were different if it had been a failure. The letter Eisenhower wrote was this. He said, "Our landings have failed, and I have withdrawn the troops. The decision to attack at this time and place was made with the best information possible. The troops, the Army, the Navy, the Air Force did all that bravery and dedication to duty could do. If any blame or fault attaches to the failure of this attempt, the responsibility is mine and mine alone." Think of that, how much we'd learn today if everyone had that as a theory and a motto, the responsibility is mine and mine alone. That was what Eisenhower wrote had it been a failure. But thankfully, because of the dedication to duty of gentlemen like this, it was not a failure, and we are all here today. We invite you now to join, and we have some cake to come up if you'd like and say a personal word of thanks to these gentlemen. We have some of the great news coverage of the Oregon Journal and the Oregonian here of the day. A little display over here of Vanport. Of course, Portland played a role in World War II history with the Kaiser shipyards in the city of Vanport, where people flocked to live to work in the shipyards. And more of the World War II story is told upstairs as well in our permanent exhibit. But thank you for joining us. One more round of applause for these gentlemen right here. So.
Here we were, the night superiors holding the channel, having God as a second front,